and welcome to the Skeptics track. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. So those of you who know our guest, Matt Dillahunty, and hopefully got to see his wonderful magic show earlier tonight, know that he's been the host of one of the most popular atheist television shows. And
did you say one of?
What? Okay, the most, excuse me, so sorry. Yes, of course, the most popular, and certainly my personal favorite.
Thank you.
Anyway, so please give a warm welcome to Matt Dillahunty.
Thank you guys so much. I think in one of the programs or something it listed this as Atheist Experience Live. I'm not taking calls. If somebody wants to call me and argue with me over the phone, we can try and do that. Mostly, I'm just tickled pink to actually be here. Almost every year, people are like, "Hey, are you going to DragonCon?" And I'm like, I don't have time in my schedule. I'm not able to go. And then all of a sudden this year there was the opportunity. Actually, Kurt Anderson called me and he said, "Hey, Brian Brushwood has to MC a comedy festival that weekend, so he won't be at DragonCon. Would you like to come down and do some magic?" And before he could even finish the sentence, I was like, yes, I will. So because of everything else, I didn't prepare anything for this. And I certainly didn't prepare for so many people to be. You guys realize it's just me. And I'm probably just going to take questions. So if you have questions, you can go ahead and line up, and I will kind of vamp in between. For those of you who don't, does anybody not know who I am? I can't imagine somebody stumbled into the room. Oh, you don't? I'm an asshole from Texas that argues about religion. I'm originally from Missouri, but I've been in Texas since 1995. Yeah, woo! Kansas City, man! Go Chiefs! Yeah, I don't care about sports ball. But I made it to, I was in the Navy for 8 years. When I got out, I went down to Austin because a friend of mine was working at Dell at the time and told me he could get me a job, which is nice because I'm entirely self-taught on anything. I don't have a credit hour or a degree in basket weaving even. But I taught myself quite a bit about computers, and I came down and I worked for Dell for about 4 years and went from, like entry-level diagnostic technician to lead engineer for workstation motherboard testing. And then I got laid off because I worked too well, as it turns out. I figured I'd tell you a story that most of you hadn't heard. I was, my entire life, people in my church thought I was supposed to be a preacher. That's what God wanted me to be. I did not want to be. I was terrified of public speaking, which is incredibly ironic now. But I left. I went in the Navy. I had a girlfriend. I was planning on getting married. That fell apart. I eventually did get married. That also fell apart. Just right now, we're waiting for the paperwork to be filed. By the way, Beth and I are still good friends. We still talk every couple of days. There's no animosity. There's nothing. She's off doing her thing, and I'm off doing mine. And it's all good. But I worked for Dell for about 4 years, and I was raised, my dad worked 2 or 3 jobs. He was a deacon at the church. He taught me that, if you do your job and you work and you have a good work ethic and you show some dedication and commitment to the company, then that's how you get ahead. I should have known that he wasn't completely right because we moved every 5 years. He worked for TWA from before I was born until TWA went under, and then of course it was American and then US Air and everything else. So I should have realized that what he was telling me and how hard he was working and how he was having to jump from job to job and place to place and move around just to keep his job might not have been the best or most accurate advice. When I started at Dell, I used to laugh at the contractors. Any contractors in the house? Yeah. I was like, oh yeah, you guys are getting paid the big bucks, but you don't have any job security. Look at me, I'm a regular employee. I've got benefits and job security right up until the point where they let you go. And what happened was I did the motherboard diagnostics suite for Dell's workstations. And the first project, they're basically, there's like 5 builds, and they expect you to have 100% test coverage at like the 4th build, the next to last build. And so the first project, I kind of almost made the goals, but the second project, I got 100% test coverage at the 3rd build. And the 3rd project, I had 100% test coverage at the 1st build. Now there's a 6-month gap between the 1st build and the 2nd build, and the last build. So they figured out I'd gotten all my work done for the next 6 months, and it happened to coincide with them needing to cut headcount. So my boss called me in and said, yeah, we're sorry, we're really happy with your work, but we got to let you go because we don't have any work for you to do. And I was like, why don't you give me those other jackasses work since I can do it faster? Well, they've got seniority and blah, blah, blah. So I was really despondent. You know, I'd built a career out of nothing. I was self-taught, made it up to being lead engineer, and then it was all taken away. And I never wanted to work in tech again. I never wanted to work for a company again. I didn't realize it at the time, but I was probably almost certainly clinically depressed for about 18 months. I stayed home. They gave me a massive severance package. They're like, we don't have any work for you for the next 6 months, but we'll give you enough to live off on for a year and a half. Oh, by the way, I say fuck and other stuff. I don't know if that's a problem for anybody on the, okay. Yeah, so, you know, somebody emailed me today to say, Matt needs to stop cussing. And I said, you need to stop buying into bullshit about language because it won't sound so puritanical. But, so I stayed home for about 18 months. I mean, my car was parked. Even the tires started rotting after a while. And, you know, I'd go out with my roommate. And I thought God was punishing me. I thought God was like, oh, okay, you wanted to go create your own career. I told you to be a preacher, so I'm going to take it all away. And I took that seriously. And so for that 18 months, I spent in pretty serious prayer and study. And I talked to my uncle, who was a medical missionary, and some other preacher friends of mine. And my roommate was an atheist. And some of you know the rest of the story. I was trying to convince my roommate, and without ever having a single conversation with him, just the process of how do you argue with and convince an ardent atheist. Love you, Heather. Yeah, it backfired spectacularly, and I found my way out. And it wasn't long after that I started writing for a couple online magazines and engaging in discussions. And one day I walked out, and there was a flyer on my mailbox to watch the Atheist Experience. And somebody where I was working at the time had already told me about it. They said, oh, because they knew I was writing stuff and, you know, I'm skeptic, atheist, humanist, blah, blah. I'm just, like, when I'm not working, I'm just, oh, no, you're wrong. No, you're wrong. No. And they said, have you seen this show? And I was like, why would I want to watch a show with a bunch of atheists on it? Why would I want to watch a show with a bunch of people I agree with? Even before I ever got involved with the show, I was like, I want to talk to the people that I don't agree with. And they're like, that's what the show is. It's a call-in show. So I saw the flyer. It was a Sunday. I called in. There's actually an episode of the show. You can hear me calling in. And Ashley and Jeff D are sitting there. And I called in and talked to them. They invited me to the after-show dinner. I went to the after-show dinner. The next week I was behind the scenes screening calls and then working the graphics. And then one day Jeff forgot it was his week to be on the show. And I had written an article about the Ten Commandments monument decisions that happened in Texas and Kentucky at the same time in 2004. And Ashley just looked at me and goes, looks like Jeff's not going to show up. You want to go on? Yeah. And I did the show. Don't go watch it. Don't go. So it's funny because I'll tell you other stuff. This is a really short intro. Thanks for getting down on your knees for me. But yeah, I filled in for Jeff, and then shortly after that I was the host and then the president. Now I'm the president and the host again, or I'm the host still, but president again. And so yeah, give me all your questions.
I've been a fan of you for some time. You get a lot of long, frustrating calls. One of my favorite times is you and your co-host hung up immediately, like long conversation. You both hung up in unison, and you said, you're right, there's a God, and he hates me. So I wanted to ask you, what are some of the things that you enjoy the most about talking with people who either don't agree with you, or some of the little pleasures of people who are just solid concrete?
Yeah, thank you. So there's a couple of quick points on that. I'm going to try to give shorter answers so I can get to as many questions as I can. And some of these you've heard before. I make a game out of it for me after doing it for 14 years. There's a couple games. One is I try to figure out exactly where they're going as quickly in the call as possible. And on a few occasions, I will make that prediction and they'll say, no, that's not what I'm doing. And then they get there. So, I have pet peeves. Like if you and I know each other and you talk to me like I'm stupid or you waste my time, those are big pet peeves. And for a lot of people, they don't understand how I can do the show with those pet peeves. And the answer is simple. I always assume that somebody's watching this for the first time and that it is their first introduction to atheism, to skepticism, to humanism. And so while I'm asked the same questions over and over, and I do have some answers that I like that I will repeat, I try to find new ways to explain it. And then based on the feedback we get in email, I know how a particular answer resonates with a particular audience. And hopefully I'm better at it now than I was 14, 15 years ago, because God, how awful would that be to do something for 14 years and be worse at it? But at least my thoughts surrounding the actual show are, I need to go out and be the best representative that I can be. Not everybody's going to agree on what the best representation is. Sometimes I'm an asshole. Sometimes I'm in a bad mood. Sometimes I cuss more than others. But I try to do what I can, and I know I'm my own harshest critic. When I leave the show, on the drive home, I'm replaying the show in my head going, oh, you should have said that. Oh, you could have said, oh, wow, why didn't you remember that? What were you thinking? Why? Oh, if you'd have said it that way, that might, and I do that over and over again. And it's, the advice I give people is if you're going to have these conversations, first of all, not everybody is the brick wall that they appear to be. People constantly, oh, why do you even bother? You're not going to change anybody's mind. Well, come read my email. I have thousands of emails from people whose minds have been changed because of what we've done on the show or the debates, et cetera. But just because you don't change somebody's mind the first time you have a conversation doesn't mean that they're the problem. Maybe you're not the one that's going to change their mind. Maybe somebody else will. But also, maybe this is the first time they've heard it. And we are pattern recognition machines. So the first time you hear something really strange, you just dismiss it. That's just weird. That's an outlier. And the second time you hear something, it's, hey, I think I've heard something like that before. And the third time, it's, whoa, 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 what's going on here? And so if it's their first time, I'm not necessarily, well, any time, I'm not trying to convince the person I'm on the phone with. I'm trying to give the best arguments that I think should be convincing to them. But I'm mostly doing it for the people who share their views and their particular arguments who are listening, because we know enough about changing minds to know that the person on the phone is almost never going to change their mind over the course of a phone call. Especially once you've made a public commitment to a position, even if you're conclusively shown to be false, there's a good chance you're going to double down. And so I'm always talking to that person as honestly as I can, but the actual target is the people out there listening, because it's almost a waste with an audience of one.
And you were my introduction, so thank you.
Awesome, thank you.
Hi, Matt.
Hi.
Hope you had a good flight in.
I drove.
You drove. Oh.
See, one of the things about carrying equipment for a magic show, and I know that it didn't look like there was much, but I pared an hour-and-a-half show down to 20 minutes, but I wanted to bring the whole show just in case. So yeah, I packed up the truck and drove 13 hours to Tuscaloosa and napped at Kurt's house and then finished the drive in.
All the people that agreed to be your slaves under the rule of Exodus 21 helped you?
Yes.
My question, so I've been an atheist for quite a bit of time. My girlfriend, when I first met her many years ago, was kind of a Bible thumper, definitely a theist. Her father's a pastor. Her sister's still in the church, but she's kind of socially liberal. In fact, actually, her sister posted something about DragonCon to her Facebook page, and then apparently one of the church members said that they were going to pray for her. So
you can get them to say they're going to pray for you by posting almost anything.
But back in the day, they sort of impressed me by the fact that they never attempted to, they knew that I was an atheist. They never attempted to convert me or press their opinions on me. But I've seen a lot of people online that are just all like, and we would go to their church services just out of courtesy, I guess. You know, you get invited and you go and you do the things. I guess they're kind of Pentecostal, but you know.
That's the first time I've ever heard those two words together.
Yeah. It's unusual, like speaking in tongues.
Yeah, no, I'm going to call Jerry when we're done. Jerry DeWitt, by the way, former Pentecostal.
Yeah, laying on hands and all
that
of
ain't
that.
Kind of Pentecostal. That's
yeah,
Pentecostal.
It's very Pentecostal. Surprisingly, they knew who I was. They must think I'm Satan or like in some other form, but never actually attempted to talk to me about it. So it kind of put me in an awkward situation where some people have told me, you know, if you go, it's like you're disrespecting their service to be there, like you're pretending to be something you're not. I don't know.
Well, if you were pretending, so I take it the crux of your question is, what do I think about atheists going to church when invited type thing?
Yeah.
Yeah. If you're going there and pretending, don't.
Okay.
But I'll tell you a story that illustrates this really clearly. Aaron Ra and Thunderfoot and myself were at the Texas Free Thought Convention, and they wanted to go over to Joel Osteen's church. And so they grabbed me, and they like, you want to go with us? And I was like, okay, because this was like a nothing burger for me. And so I jump in the car, and on the drive over there, they're like, okay, here's what we're going to do. You're going to take this camera, and you're going to hide it underneath your jacket right here. And I'm going to take the other hammer and hide it underneath my jacket so that if they take one of them, they, maybe they won't get both of them. And then what's our story when we get there? And I just listened to them, and I listened to them talk, and their perception of what they were getting ready to do, I mean, you would think that we were like infiltrating the Bilderberger group or something like that. Which isn't even hardly a real thing. Sorry, Alex. But I told them, I was, you guys are wrong. Pull your cameras out. We're going to walk up to the door. We're going to walk in the front door. They're going to show you around. They're going to welcome you. They want you there. They are so happy to brag about that and make sure that you feel welcome. This is what they're about. And I was, of course, right. And we walk in the door, and they start talking about how Joel doesn't get a paycheck, and he does, we've got this big building. He doesn't. The church doesn't pay him. He makes his money off of his books and other stuff. He doesn't draw a salary from that church. He doesn't need to, because everybody in the church buys all his shitty books. So by and large, when it comes to if I'm at somebody's home and they want to pray, I stand there quietly and let them pray. I no longer bow my head, because it's more fun to look around to see who's looking at me. But I stand there quiet and respectful. If I'm in somebody else's house or somebody else's church, I follow the rules. The one thing I don't do, and I was raised Southern Baptist, like I don't participate in communion, because that's for church members within the Baptist church. And while I will stand up and sit down when they stand up and sit down, I do that in church, and I don't even stand up for the pledge. I stay seated for that all the time now. But yeah, just they want you there, and they're going to be friendly right up until the point you're not. For most churches, there's exceptions.
I've just gotten lucky so far, I guess.
Yeah. It's not a big deal, and as long as you're not trying to pretend to be something you're not, it's fine.
Okay.
On the other hand, if somebody's wanting you to go as a requirement to spend time with you, like you're gonna go to church with me,
yeah,
screw that.
No, she's entirely an atheist.
Yeah.
Now, like more so, very
go
outspokenly.
take notes, and when the pastor starts to ask you questions about who you are and everything else, ask him if he wants to sit down and have a little conference talk, because you have questions.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you.
I was a Christian until a couple of weeks ago.
A couple of weeks ago. Wow.
Vice Rhino, Paula Gia, and Aaron Ra are responsible for that change. My field of study is law. I have not taken a science class since 1979. And so when I listen to some of this stuff, I do not have the science background to understand it. What can I read to build my science background?
It's going to depend on specifically what area you're looking at. A lot of times people ask me what they should read, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, what do I say? There are books that I frequently recommend, although the most recommended book of mine has nothing to do strictly with science. It's a book called Innumeracy by John Allen Paulos, and it will fundamentally change the way you think about things. If you're not especially dead set on reading, I always recommend 2 video series from James Burke, which you probably have to buy on DVD. One of them is called Connections, and the other one is The Day the Universe Changed. Don't take this the wrong way, but you may be able to just go in and audit local college courses on science. And if you're looking for like a general understanding, there's tons of skeptic websites and resources. Even Wikipedia is not bad to start. Just when you get to the bottom of the article and there's all the references, go dig through those references. I don't have a good recommendation for an intro. Anybody have a good recommendation for an intro to science book? Yes.
Not even a book, but Cosmos is a good.
Sure.
Place to start.
Yeah. Yes, that's sciencey. I wish I had a better recommendation for it. I tell you what you can do. You can email me. My regular email address is sans.deity@gmail.com, or you can email president@atheist-community.org, at least for a little while. And I'll ask around, and if you have a specific area you're looking at, I will make phone calls. And I know you're new to all this, so if you want, I'll even ask Dawkins if he's got a intro to science book, but I'm pretty sure his answer is not going to be as intro as we might want. But yeah. Yeah. Thanks, and welcome back to reality.
Secular morality, go. No. In all seriousness, I'm a huge fan. It's an honor to be in front of you here asking you a question. I actually discovered you through your talk with Jordan Peterson, and I've probably watched that video front to back 4 or 5 times. I'm big fans of both of you, which is odd. But
I can fix that.
that's
you
what I'm
have not
hoping.
watched that discussion enough.
That's what I'm hoping. It really is good to be out here. So, in all seriousness, secular morality is something I'm really coming to grips with. I've been a lifelong hopeful agnostic. So when it comes to secular morality, my whole family is very religious, and they all say, "Oh, well, your secular morality couldn't be anywhere without God and Jesus and all the religious morality that precludes it." So I'm just wondering. I don't have an argument. And when they say that to me, I'm like, well, yeah, I guess you're right. The basis for my secular morality wouldn't really exist without all of these fundamentals laid before me through the Christ times.
Which fundamentals are those? Slavery, original sin, genocide?
Trust me, I go back and forth all the time. So my question for you is, I believe that secular morality stems from the biological nature of humanity and existence, and you can see it all around you. But I don't really have a very good argument for that. So when someone comes at me with the fundamentals of Christian morality, and I try and give an argument, I don't really have a lot of ammunition. So I'm hoping you might be able to. What is your answer for the biological nature of secular morality?
So don't go watch the discussion with Jordan Peterson again.
Okay.
Instead, Google Superiority of Secular Morality, which is the talk that I gave a couple times on the foundation, because it's too long of an answer to actually give here.
I know.
But you could pick arbitrary things. You could say, let's just begin by assuming that death is preferable to life, and then see how far we get. Well, not very far. So maybe it's worthwhile to start with the notion that life is generally preferable to death, that health is preferable to sickness, that pleasure is generally preferable to pain. And I say generally for all of those because they are intermingled. But if we had those 3 as a foundation, we then can build off of that. Now, the only question that anybody has raised, and Sam Harris and I have very similar, his book, The Moral Landscape, is very similar to my take on morality. We've talked about this. The only objection people can say is that, well, you're basing it on well-being, which isn't well-defined, and you haven't given me any reason why I should care about well-being. Well, okay, I agree with you. It's not well-defined. We're in the process of figuring it out and learning more. But that doesn't mean we don't know anything. I'm pretty sure everybody in this room would agree that if you came up here and lopped my head off, that would not be in my best interest, and probably not in yours either. But we don't necessarily have to go to those extremes. I think what a lot of people are looking for is this notion that we have an answer to every possible moral dilemma that's out there. Nobody's got that, not even religions. Which is why the churches now are struggling. They've got these ancient books. What do we do about cloning? What are the moral views on cloning? The Bible doesn't talk about it. Only through particular interpretations and massaging things can you get anywhere near that. What about transgender issues? Well, yeah, the Bible talks about men dressing as women, but that's an archaic notion which has nothing to do with someone's gender identity. and how they should, whether or not they can transition, and how we should treat them after they, in this process. What rights should they have? These are moral questions that get to the heart of who people are and how we're going to interact. You could begin with very simple things and build, which is exactly what I think human beings have always done. Mm-hmm. It's just that some people are lazier than others and would rather be told the answers from on high. Yeah. And so it's not like anything within any religion has a better foundation. It's perhaps better packaging. God said, "Thou shalt not kill." Well, thanks. I figured that out before I read the Bible.
Yeah.
I was for I knew killing was a bad thing. And by the way, we don't, while we may be born as like a blank slate, people tend to view children as if they're, as if they don't learn morality. Yeah, they do. And one of the first things kids learn is fairness. And we see this in other primates as well. There's experiments where you've got a couple of monkeys and you're rewarding them both equally and everything's fine, and you're giving them both a cracker and they're doing their thing, cracker. And then as soon as you start giving one of them a grape and the second one a cracker, the one that's getting a cracker gets pissed. So I want that grape. Why am I not getting it? Even though it's the same treat they've been getting.
And conversely, they also found that when you taught apes the value of price and exchange, the first thing they did was prostitution.
I hadn't heard that, but good for them.
There you go.
We're both. I'm on record of let's stop shaming sex workers, because I think most of them need a badge.
We're both learning something today. Thank you.
So I can't do a whole thing on morality. You can look up that talk. I recommend
Googled
Sam's book.
Yep.
I have a couple minor disagreements with Sam, but not on the foundations.
You're not allowed.
And the truth is that every religious objection to a secular moral system, every single one, is one that they cannot solve either. Well, if you don't appeal to religion, how do you resolve conflicts between people? That already exists. That's why there's 20,000 denominations of Christianity, because they couldn't resolve conflicts. The difference between religious morality and secular morality is that religious morality does it through conversion and control, and secular morality does it through debate, discussion, evidence, and being convincing like that. We don't have all the answers. We may never get all the answers, but that doesn't mean that we don't have some answers, and it doesn't mean we don't know how to go about getting them.
Right.
Yeah.
I'd say you're a godsend, and thank you, but obviously maybe the wrong place. Thank you very much.
I'll take it. Thanks. Wow, turn that shirt down.
I wore this for you.
That's outstanding. Yeah. How you doing, man?
How you doing, bud? Rob from Key West.
Yeah.
Couple questions. I know that you drink Coke Zero and you know things, right? How much did you know before?
Coke Zero?
Right. And then how much have you learned from interviewing and talking and learning, and how much do you read? Like, where does your knowledge come from? Is it more of a skeptic thing, or do you just take in all these people that you talk to, Sam Harris and Randy and everything, and just how much of it comes from other people, and how much do you sit at home and just absorb?
That's legitimately the first time I've been asked anything even in the ballpark of that question.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, it's great. So I would say that for the most part, a lot of the learning process begins either from something I heard from somebody or just a curious question. And then there's a process of researching and trying to find out what other people's views on that. And then I sit around quite often for hours having little miniature debates in my head. Well, what about this? Well, what about this? What about this? I'm an obsessive learner. I have a gazillion hobbies. If I listed off the things that I've done at a, let's say, high amateur to semi-pro level, including I used to play pool at that level, paid my mortgage or my rent for quite a while that way. Chainmail jewelry, origami, magic I've been doing since I was 3 and obsessively studying that. I've learned more in probably the last 20 years than in the 30 before that, because I was bored as a student in high school and I didn't have any direction. I didn't know what I wanted to do. It was one of the reasons I ended up in the Navy. I grew up in the church and it was just like, oh, this is going to be your future, right up until I figured out it wasn't. I don't claim originality for almost any of my ideas or even statements. Every now and then there'll be a meme posted out there and it's a quote and it'll have my name and picture on it. And I'm like, I might have said that, but I don't think I'm remotely the first person to say it or even in that way.
But your ability to recall that is it's I'm
a really good bullshitter too.
But you're so quick with it. Your wit and your it's amazing.
If
how
you're
you can just go in
terrified
your
of
brain
being called out as an imposter, you get really good at bullshitting. I don't know how to explain or to describe it. I'm an obsessive learner. And the second I figure out, I want to learn this. Like, I have a keyboard in my house. Now, I took piano lessons for about 4 weeks when I was a kid. I hated it. I took guitar lessons for a couple weeks when I was a kid. I hated it too. I didn't like the scales and practicing.
Then YouTube came out. You can just learn everything you want.
Well, I learned how to play guitar in the Navy during the Gulf War. And over the 6 or 8 months that I was there, I basically just sat there with a guitar and watched somebody else play and mimicked it until I learned. And I'm terrible now because I don't play much. But most of the things I learn up to the point of diminishing returns. Like, I could keep going and possibly learn more, but there's 50,000 other things to learn, so I'm good there. Let me move on to this. And then I can always go back to it. So, yeah, I have no idea how to answer your question. I do what I do.
Yeah. Thank you.
Sure, thank you.
So I'm one of the people that stumbled in here without really knowing much about you before coming in. You said something at the very beginning that piqued my interest. I also grew up very religious. I was raised incredibly Pentecostal, and when I got into
As
school...
opposed to kind of Pentecostal.
Oh, no. People on the floor pretending there's demons in them while an old man straddles them,
Yeah.
That sort of stuff. But there was a point in my life, I was in school, I was studying Greek mythology, and I kind of thought, wow, there's a lot of gods. Who would believe in these? And then I'm like, oh, shit.
Almost the exact same thing happened to me. In 8th grade, I took a comparative religions course, and I know it didn't impact me much at the time, but I can remember sitting there going, wow, these are some really weird beliefs. I'm so glad I believe in the real one.
Right. And so I kind of had that. And so I had a bit of a two-part thing. One, when you were religious, when you were growing up, because I don't meet a lot of people that talk about that time, what was the closest you ever felt to God then? And what moment in your life most awakened you where you realized, oh, fuck, I'm the guy?
Yeah. So I was really active in church, and most of my friends were there. I've never been a morning person, so like Sunday morning was never particularly pleasant, but I was in church Sunday morning, Sunday night, Monday night, Wednesday night, Thursday night youth stuff, then Friday, Monday night was visitation, Friday was other stuff. Now I get it. In case there's a nice Southern Baptist person who snuck in the room, I know that how much you attend church is not a measure of your religiosity. I'll give you a measure of my religiosity in just a second. I walked down the aisle at the age of 5 at a revival and accepted Jesus into my heart. And my parents were a little concerned. And in my teenage years, when I really began to get a better understanding of the theology, it occurred to me, oh my gosh, I've spent since I was 5 thinking I was saved, but I couldn't have understood it then if I'm only now beginning to understand it. So there was this process of like rededicating your life over and over and over and over again. There's a guilt cycle involved in much religion because you can't possibly live up to what, it's there, it's used as a tool. You can't live up to what God expects from you, so you're going to fail, which brings you back. And it doesn't matter whether you're a Catholic who's going to confession or whether you're a Southern Baptist who's going to the revival and rededicating. When I would sing in church and participate in all that, I was convinced that I was in the presence of the Holy Spirit. I get the goosebumps, elation, and everything else. And the thing is, everybody around me, who's got the thing is t-shirt? Thank you. Everybody around me was saying, oh, that's the Holy Spirit. And so you believe that because it's an authoritarian structure and because you trust your family members and you trust the people around you. And you're like, I feel something. And when they're describing as the Holy Spirit, you have no other explanation, so you run with it. And I did. And I was as convinced as anybody that I was truly a believer, that I was saved, and I was in the presence of God. And actually, I did a debate a couple years ago in Austin against Mike Licona on the resurrection. And Mike presented the weirdest case for the resurrection ever because he talked about Ouija boards and floating trash cans and other stuff. It's wild. But if you go watch that debate during the Q&A, there's a guy that gets up and walks up to the microphone and tells me who he is. And he was now the debate was in Austin, he was a deacon in my church, First Baptist Church of Harvester in St. Charles, Missouri, who had heard about this debate and flew down. And basically during the I don't ever have to give people my bona fides anymore, because during the Q&A he basically said, look, you may not remember me, I was a deacon in your church, and we were all convinced that you were going to go on to great things for God. What happened? And in the back of my mind, I was like, I went on to great things, just not for God. But I gave them an answer. And if you find that debate, it'll talk more about this, because I was in a Baptist church with 500 people, and I was one of only maybe 20 atheists there. A couple of my friends always show up. But I wanted them to know. And so having this guy saying, as far as we all knew, you were just like us, and now you're not. The second part of your question about the kind of how and when it happened, it was an 18-month process where I was trying to convince my roommate, and we never had a conversation, but I'd go out and look at what atheists were saying. And I was reading Voltaire and Hume and infidels.org, which is a great site, which is run by my friend Eddie Tabash. And I've been fortunate to become really good friends with a lot of those guys there. Those writings helped me out, but it wasn't a one-day thing. It wasn't an epiphany. It was finding Bible stories and saying, that's not in the Bible. And I'd read the whole Bible twice before this, and it's there. Or I'd say, it's in the Bible, but you're taking it out of context. No, actually. I love it when people call in to try to tell me I'm taking it out of context, because I go to great lengths to make sure that I'm putting it in a correct context, which is why when I did that video on slavery, I went to every single verse that addresses slavery and the surrounding verses in order to explain it. So it wasn't a moment. As a matter of fact, my roommate and I were driving home from work one day, and I looked at him and I said, I think I'm kind of agnostic now. And he goes, cool, and kept driving. But,
well, thank you so much. It's hard to put yourself out there and be vulnerable and tell people your story, but you do a great job of it, and it helps people, and I appreciate what you do.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm glad you stumbled in.
Hi.
Hey.
I didn't have a question or anything for you. I
Next.
just wanted okay. I just wanted to express my deep appreciation for everything that you do.
Oh,
there
thank
was
you
a
so
week.
much.
There was a caller that called on last week that was trying to transition out of the Mormon community.
Right.
And he broke down crying on the
Yeah.
phone for everything that was going through. And you gave him the words and everything that he needed to hear to truly move on from it. He was alone in it, and you gave him exactly what he needed. And that's really spoke to me. And I knew that I was going to see a DragonCon this weekend, and I knew I needed to express thanks to you for him, for what you did for him.
Thank you very much. Yeah, Andrew Seidel was on the show with me. It was 2 weeks ago, or no, it was a week ago. But then Vienna did a second Atheist Experience after we did. Yeah, we did. Andrew signed a book for him. We're putting it together with a couple other things, and I'll let you know that while we don't, like if somebody calls the show, we don't have their contact information, and if somebody emails, I will never give their email to somebody else. But if you hear somebody on the show and they're in your area and you are part of an organization that may be helpful to them, feel free to email us to let us know who you are and where you are, because as soon as that call was over, inside of an hour, I had 2 different emails from ex-Mormons in his area saying, is there any way you can please put us in touch with him? And what I will do is when I talk to him, whether it's by email or phone or whatever else, I will give him their contact information so that he can reach out to them. But yeah, thanks so much for saying that. It was, I like that call.
Hello, I had a question about politics. I was wondering...
Well, this will be easy.
Since you have such a reach, I was wondering if you're starting to look into how we can fix some of the things that are happening. A lot of religious organizations are starting to get their hands into politics, and it concerns me a lot that we're going down this path. So I was wondering, do you know of anything that's happening down in Austin that they're starting up? Are there any organizations that we should support so that we can make sure that reason instead of fantasy takes over?
Yeah, so there's lots of different organizations, resources. The Atheist Community of Austin is a 501c3, which means we can't endorse candidates. We can talk about issues, and we have position statements, but we have to be careful about what we say, because while technically religious organizations aren't supposed to be engaged in politics from the pulpit, they do, and they get away with it, and I want their tax status taken away for doing it. Tax, and actually, I want the tax exempt status just taken away from religion in general, so that now everybody's playing on an even playing field. Because in order for us to get a tax exempt status, we have to demonstrate that we're providing something that is in the public interest and everything else. Churches, they have access to fire departments, etc. They have this incredibly privileged position, and nobody seems to be, or very few people seem to be calling them out on their BS. And then there's the whole deal about changing the Johnson Amendment. I always, and granted, I'm a board member for American Atheists, and American Atheists legal team is phenomenal and doing really good work, but they're not the only ones. I also support the Freedom from Religion Foundation. Andrew Seidel was down on the show recently. He's one of my first go-tos for any church-state separation issues. And the nonprofits program was actually started when Bush was running for president. And while it was involved Atheist Community of Austin people, it was not a product of the Atheist Community of Austin specifically so they could talk about politics. It's not that way anymore. It's an actual product of the ACA, and they'll talk about issues. There are a number of organizations, FFRF, Atheists United for Separation of Church and State, Americans United. The former president of that was Barry Lynn, and he's retired, which kind of hurts me a little bit because he's a theist and I'm an atheist, and we got along great and we had the same mission. And we did an event together at the Secular Student Alliance one year, and I got up to speak right after him, and I started off by saying, I'm on a mission to change the world and help free anybody and everybody from religious thought voluntarily. I'm not stealing it away. But you don't have to worry, Barry. I want you to stay a believer because I need a believer on my side of the church-state separation issue, or something along those lines. So those organizations, if you find a violation, you can go there. But any member of any local secular group can get actively involved in protesting politicking. You can go down and talk to your representatives. One of the things that some of the organizations are doing is making sure that we have a good member base. Now, currently, I'd say the Atheist Community of Austin has probably 250, 300 paid members, but we have a couple 100,000 people watching YouTube stuff and everything else. So we're going to change what we count as members, so that if I have to go in and speak to somebody, and I'm speaking on behalf of the Atheist Community of Austin, instead of going in as a local group with 200 members, I'm going in as a media force with hundreds of thousands of people watching, and that is all honest and true, and it will carry more weight with them. So one of the best things you can do is get involved with your local groups, find the people who want to participate in sort of political activism, and do it.
Thank you.
Yep. Oh, and here's the most important thing. Every time somebody tells you that you can't run for office because you're an atheist, they are fucking wrong. We fixed this several times. In the 1950s, we fixed this, and the Supreme Court ruled on it, and we did it again. Herb Silverman did it in South Carolina a couple times. Yes, the Texas state constitution still requires somebody to believe in a higher power to run for office, but that will always be in the Constitution. It's unlikely to ever be amended, but it has no legal standing because of the Supreme Court ruling. You can run for office, you should run for office, and you don't have to run for president. You can run for school boards and state boards of education and city councils, because that's where stuff really starts. So run.
Hi, I'm another straggler in, but I'm very glad that I did. I share a very similar history with you. I was born in a small town in Tennessee, Southern Baptist.
Where?
Jamestown.
Okay. My ex-wife's from Cleveland.
Okay, I've been to Cleveland. So, in Jamestown, growing up, literally everyone is either Southern Baptist or some other flavor of that, and I had the similar experience of getting saved young, and then something wasn't right, it didn't take, and then having to redo it. And at one point, I was down for so long, I was talking to people, I was like, listen, man, it is not working. And then you had to say the prayer with me, and I'm like, no, it's still not working, dude. And up to that point, I'd bought into everything I'd been told, and it sort of came naturally that it was all bullshit. So I decided I'm going to just see what else they were lying to me about. And I started doing drugs, and I started just doing anything I, thought I wanted to do. And I noticed that where I'm from today, fortunately, I was able to get off the drugs and do a little bit better with my life. But a lot of my family members are dead. A lot of my friends are dead. And back where I'm from, it's like drugs or Jesus, right? You're either in the church and you're active, or you're a junkie with your oxys and your meth. And so there's no debate in those sorts of communities. There's no way to break into the conversation with, rational atheism. And especially even with my own family, I can't have these kinds of conversations. And it's just such a toxic issue. How do you break through to maybe people you care about or people in your community that are suffering because of this false choice, right? Like either religion or you're just a bad person and you should do all these bad things.
I don't. So I say that kind of as a half joke. For my 50th birthday, my mom sent me a card. I read it out on the show. So watch the episode just after March 31st of this year, and the card's there, because I wanted people to know that, yes, I have to deal with religious conflict in my family too, because some people have this view of, well, Matt's above it all. He's the guy with the answers on the TV show. He doesn't have to deal with this. Yes, I do. So for one thing is that I don't make outgoing calls on the show. People call in. I don't go door to door saying, have you stopped believing in Jesus? I can help you. I engage with the people who want to engage with the conversation. And as far as I'm concerned, when it comes to family and friends and people you care about, the best thing you can do is be out and open about who you are and let them know that you're willing to have a conversation when they want to. But that you're not there to just be preached at or chastised. You don't owe anybody an explanation for who you are or what you believe. But if you want to engage in those, just letting them know that you're willing to do that is a start. Because now it's not you trying to push something on them or saying you're wrong. And also it's worth pointing out that most of my debate opponents are incredibly frustrated because they expect that they're going to come up and say, yes, God's real. And I'm going to show up and say, no, God's not real. And instead, I structure things so that it's on far more reasonable ground, which is they're showing up and saying, yes, God's real. And I'm saying, I don't think your reasons for being convinced of that are good reasons. Let's talk about that. Because the proposition is ultimately unfalsifiable. There's no way necessarily, for some of them, you can probably show they're false. If they believe in a God that has the sky as swirled pink ice cream all the time, okay, we can show that that's not correct. That God might still exist. Maybe they're wrong about that God. There's a lot of points that I make in the longer version of Magic and Skepticism to say, we'd like to say that these psychic mediums who claim that they're speaking with the dead, they're all frauds. Except you don't know that. And when the James Randi Educational Foundation would do tests on the paranormal, when they tested Dowser and he fails, and then we test another one, fail. Does that mean that dowsing's bullshit? That's the temptation, but that's not actually the correct response. What you've actually done is you've shown that this person cannot, on this day, in this way, produce the effect. It may be possible that dowsing is real or somebody else can demonstrate it. It may be possible that somebody's communicating with the afterlife. Some of them are falsifiable. If they give you, if you're talking to a spirit medium and they're like, oh, I see you come from a family of 8. Well, you're full of it. Because, how do you want to stress? I did some cold reading on that show the guy was talking about the other day. And I didn't explain it, but one of the questions was, I was like, I get the impression you're from a family of 4. And she kind of paused for a second. And I was like, how many siblings do you have? And she said 3. And I was like, there you go. But if she'd have said 1, I'd have said, there you go. I got lots of different ways to make this seem like it's a real thing. When it comes to those conversations, being yourself, and actually people ask me, one of the more common questions is, how do I come out to those people? How do I let them know? And my answer for years has been, there's no reason to make any big deal out of it. Let me sit you down. Mom and Dad, I have something to tell you. I don't believe in God anymore. Woo. If instead you just keep going on about your life and living the true and honest you, at some point they're going to ask you, hey, why haven't you been going to church? I don't believe that anymore. I host the Atheist Experience TV show. I am an atheist. I use the word all the time. That doesn't necessarily mean it's the right word to use in those initial conversations. Being honest and saying, I don't believe that anymore, can prompt a conversation that saying, oh, I'm an atheist, would shut down. And so just have whatever conversations you're comfortable with. Don't try to change and fix everybody, because if you're going into it with the notion of either saying, oh, look how much smarter I am than you, which, by the way, believers aren't stupid or any more stupid than anybody else. Being convinced of something, whether it's religion or Reiki or crystal healing or whatever woo type thing, it's not about how smart or stupid you are. My IQ didn't go up when I found my way out of religion. I just gained access to different information and a better way of looking at it. That's, if you're looking at this in terms of, I need to fix you, or let me show you how much more than you I know, you're probably, and I don't mean this directed at you, I'm everybody, you are probably shooting yourself in the foot, and you're probably not going to have very good conversations. I had a 6-hour conversation with my mom over Christmas, which, I mean, if you guys had heard it, you would have thought I was on the show. And that this was the most just like highest level of batshittery you could have imagined. And yet it was me and my mom. And because we'd been prohibited from having this conversation for so long, there was a lot of stuff that came out. And it was very difficult. And so then 3 months later, I get that birthday card. And at that point, I was like, screw it, I'm reading this for everybody so that they see what I actually have to deal with in my life. Now, I'm still on fairly good terms with my parents. I don't think they I know they didn't watch the episode where I read the card, but reading that card is probably one of the most popular things that's happened on the show in the past few years. And the number of people I get emailing me saying, oh my gosh, I had no idea you dealt with stuff like that. My mom thinks the earth may be flat. My mom listens to, she never leaves a home and has been pretty much homebound for 40 years. Her friends are Dad, Jesus, oh, sorry, I need to put it in the right order. Jesus, Dad, and whichever YouTube preacher she's discovered recently that most matches her views. Demons are taking over the world. We're always in the end times. Trump is God's appointed. And that struck a chord because I looked at her and I was like, Mom, if I said in public the things Trump has said in public, you would disown me, and yet you vote for him? He's God's chosen. You're not. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. We've got like about 6 minutes left, so I'll try to get to the rest of the people in line as quickly as I can.
Hey, Matt, welcome to Georgia. I'm here with
you.
my son. We're both thrilled to see you and hope you come back many more times. Question is, when I'm having conversations with theists, often when the term religious comes up, they are quick to disassociate themselves from that term.
They're lying.
I've never been able to get a real clear answer. They just get real squirrely, and even when you define what Christianity is and they check all the boxes, they still, but I'm not religious. What do you think they're getting at? I can't seem to make sense of it.
So there's a new trend, and it's, I'm not religious, I have a personal relationship with Jesus. That's not religion. And it's a way for people to recognize that there are problems with organized religion, and that's not who they are. This goes not only for the religious label, the supernatural label, the spiritual label. I have a video called Spiritual But Not Religious. By the way, you can go to patreon.com/atheistdebates. Give me your money so that I can keep doing this stuff. But also there's actual content there. And so I have a video up there about spiritual but not religious and how it's kind of BS. What they're doing is trying to distinguish themselves from all the fake religions because they've got the real one, and so they don't want to give it the religious label. It's dishonest in a sense. Set it aside. And this goes for everything. No matter, define your terms as best you can in a debate. I debated Jay Dyer a week ago. We both agreed that we had presuppositions, and at the end of the debate, we find out we have two completely definitions of what a presupposition is. And I wouldn't have thought this was the case for somebody as deep in philosophy as he was. If a word, any word, is getting in the way of the discussion, throw it out, make up a new word, define it together. Oh, let's not worry about religion or organized religion or anything else. Let's go with Fergalburgle. Fergalburgle means, I believe I have a personal relationship with the risen Christ. What other things should we put in there under this Fergalburgle label for your particular thing? Get all that defined, and now you can have that conversation, because it matters far more about getting to the heart of what the ideas are than what you're going to call it, which is why all these arguments about, well, I'm not an atheist, I'm an agnostic, or, you know, whatever. I don't care. Call yourself whatever you want. But at the end of the day, if I'm in a debate with somebody and they say, well, you're not really an atheist, I am. Under my definition, most normative definitions, you can play that game if you want to. But if it's really going to get in the way of us having a conversation, then can we at least agree, I do not believe in the God that you're talking about, and maybe we can have that conversation. When the words get in the way, throw them out.
Got it. Makes sense. Thank you.
Sure.
Hey, so I am a Southern Baptist preacher's daughter.
Yay.
And I, through getting a science degree and now being a science teacher, as of this year, found that I no longer believed. And so, and with the help of you guys as well.
Thank you.
And so now I'm in this weird part where I've moved out, but I'm still doing laundry at their house. And we're not going to church. My husband is also not religious. And we don't want to lie to my parents that we're going to a specific church because they will talk to that preacher. And so...
Yeah, you're in a spot where it's easy to get caught. So
Yeah.
I just wouldn't lie.
Yeah, so it's like, I don't want to say like that we're not going to go to church because I don't want to have that conversation every day, but I also don't want to lie to them. So it's like...
That's a short-term fix. I don't think her parents are going to stop asking. It gets back to the answer I gave before, where, you know, you can ask, you can just be honest with them and say, you know, hey, I've got my doubts, I've got my concerns, I'm going through things and I'm trying to sort it out. Pray for me. Mm-hmm. That would be happy. Please just punch to pray. It's actually, this is how I worked it out with my mom and dad. When they first figured this out, is I said, you believe there's a God, you believe that God wants me to know that he exists, and you believe that God has a plan and, you know, everything works according to his plan, and that you can talk to God in prayer. So what you need to do is, instead of preaching at me or giving me your personal testimony, is pray for God to reveal himself to me, because you know me. And if a God reveals himself to me, I'm not going to sit there and go, nah. I might say, I don't want anything to do with you, but I'll at least believe that God exists. And so as soon as I did that, it put the onus back on God's shoulders instead of theirs. So they didn't feel like failures as spiritual leaders or parents. And they could also rationalize a bit and say, you know what? Because one of the emails I get a lot, and I know that at least one of my parents is convinced of this, I'm going through a phase. And perhaps when all the Christians are resurrected and taken away and the tribulation begins for the people with that version of theocracy, I will be here to recognize the truth and lead all of the godless heathens to Jesus during that time. Mm-hmm. Or God's going to give me a miracle baby and all of a sudden I'm going to come running back to Jesus. You can do all of those things, but also if your parents love you, and it's probably the case, it may not turn out as bad as you might expect. Greta Christina did a book on coming out and how to do it and everything else, and of the 400 people she interviewed, only one person regretted it, even though many of them went through some really bad times. And some of them lost all contact with their family and yet still didn't regret it. I had to make decisions about whether or not I want Like when I read that letter from my mom, if that was the last time I talked to my parents, I was actually okay with it on that day, because this is a decade-long thing that we got to. But there's only like 4 seconds left.
Yeah.
Thank you for your question. Thank you guys
Thank
for
you.
turning up. Can we get the house lights up for just a second? Is that possible? I'd like to do one quick thing. Okay, maybe partially in the dark. If you used to be religious and are no longer religious, raise your hand. I think it's worth talking to people. Even if they weren't convinced by me or something a friend of mine said, they were convinced by something. And nobody is really going to be convinced in a vacuum where they're surrounded by people who believe the same as they do and are never challenged on their beliefs. So it's worth talking, and I appreciate you guys being here. Thanks so much. Enjoy the rest of DragonCon. There's more stuff coming up in a minute. Thank you.